Welcome back to Mr. Kirst. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true scary stories from empty towns in the Appalachian Mountains. These are places where nobody lives anymore. Towns that got left behind and forgotten. The stories from these ghost towns will give you chills. But before we start, please think about hitting subscribe. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends and family. I'd also love to hear where you're watching from. Thank you all for your support. It means so much to me. Now let's get into these creepy stories. I'm 67 years old, and honestly, I never thought I'd be telling anyone this story. My name's Robert, and up until 3 months ago, I was just a regular retired mailman from West Virginia. Spent 32 years delivering mail through these mountains, knew every back road and holler like the back of my hand. But that was before Blackwater Bend. Before I had to choose between dying and living in a way that, well, you'll understand soon enough. See, I was supposed to have heart surgery. The doctors at Charleston General told me straight up, at my age it was maybe 50-50 I'd make it through. My ticker had been giving me trouble for years, chest pains that would drop me to my knees, shortness of breath that made climbing stairs feel like running a marathon. The surgeon, this young guy who probably wasn't even born when I started carrying mail, he looked at me with that practiced sympathy doctors get good at and said, "Mr. Patterson, we need to do this soon or you won't see Christmas." That's when I decided I needed to see my grandson Tommy one more time. He was living down in North Carolina with my daughter Sarah, about 200 miles south through some of the prettiest mountain country you've ever seen. Sarah and we'd had our differences over the years. Mostly about me being too stubborn and her being too busy with her own life to visit much. But Tommy, he was 8 years old and the light of what was left of my world. I had some money saved up, about $15,000 I'd been keeping for emergencies, and I figured if I was going to die on that operating table, I wanted to make sure it went to him in person. Instead of taking the interstate like a sensible person, I decided to drive the scenic route. If these were going to be my last few days of feeling halfway decent, I wanted to see the mountains one more time. Wanted to remember why I'd spent my whole life in these hills, breathing this air, watching the seasons change the colors of the ridgelines. My old pickup truck, a '98 Ford that had seen better decades, wasn't exactly built for comfort, but she'd gotten me through 32 years of mountain postal routes. I figured she had one more trip in her. That was my first mistake. About 40 miles into the back roads, somewhere between Beckley and nowhere, the temperature gauge started creeping into the red. I'd been driving for maybe 3 hours, taking my time, stopping to rest when my chest started acting up. The truck had been running a little hot, but nothing that seemed serious. Mountain driving will do that to an old engine. But when I saw that needle hit the danger zone, I knew I had to find somewhere to pull over before I blew the radiator completely. That's when I saw the sign for Blackwater Bend. Population 127, established 1889. The kind of small mountain town that probably had more people in the cemetery than walking around. Perfect place to let the truck cool down for a few hours. Maybe find someone who knew about engines. I'd delivered mail to hundreds of towns just like it over the years. The road into Blackwater Bend wound down through thick woods for about 2 miles before opening up into what I guess you'd call the town center. And right away something felt off. Not scary off, just wrong somehow. The place looked like everyone had just stepped inside for lunch and would be back in 5 minutes. All the buildings were in decent shape. A general store, a post office that looked newer than some I'd worked in, a little church with fresh white paint, maybe 25 buildings total. But there wasn't a soul in sight. No cars parked on the street, no lights in any windows, no sound except my truck engine ticking as it cooled down. I parked in front of what looked like the General Stoat. Rian got out to stretch my legs. The silence hit me like a wall. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no wind moving through the trees. Just complete, total quiet. In 32 years of mountain routes, I'd never heard anything like it. Even the deepest woods have some kind of sound. A creek bubbling somewhere, leaves rustling, something alive making noise. But Blackwater Bend was silent as a tomb. My chest was hurting pretty bad from the drive, that familiar crushing pain that made it hard to breathe right. I figured I'd walk around a little, see if anyone was home, maybe find a phone to call Sarah and let her know I'd be late. That's when I noticed the moss. Every building in town had this strange moss growing on it. Not the regular green stuff you see on old logs and north-facing rocks. This was different, darker, almost black in places, with these tiny root-like threads that seemed to pulse when you looked at them just right. It covered the lower parts of all the buildings like a living carpet, thick as your thumb in some places. I reached out and touched some of it on the general store wall, just curious. It was warm, which seemed weird for moss, and it had this soft, almost velvety texture. The moment my skin made contact with it, something strange happened. The arthritis pain in my hands, the constant ache I'd lived with for 15 years, just disappeared, completely gone. I flexed my fingers, expecting the usual stiffness and grinding sensation in my joints, but they moved smooth as butter. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Stress does funny things to your body, and Lord knows I had enough stress thinking about heart surgery and dying and leaving Tommy without a grandfather. But when I pressed my palm flat against more of the moss, the chest pain started fading too. That crushing weight I'd been carrying around for months, the feeling like someone was standing on my ribs, it just melted away. For the first time in years, I could take a full, deep breath. I spent the next hour walking around town, touching the moss on different buildings, trying to figure out what was happening to me. Every place I made contact, my body felt better, stronger. The chronic pain in my lower back from years of carrying mail bags disappeared. My vision got sharper. Even my hearing seemed to improve. I could pick up tiny sounds I hadn't noticed before, like the almost inaudible humming the moss made when the wind moved through it. That's when I started to understand this wasn't just moss. It was something else entirely, something that was fixing my body from the inside out. I found a bench in front of the post office and sat down to think. The truck still needed time to cool down, and honestly, I wasn't in any hurry to leave. I felt better than I had in 20 years. Better than I had since before my wife Martha passed, before my body started falling apart piece by piece, before every day became a struggle against pain and exhaustion and the slow march toward death. The moss, or whatever it was, seemed to be everywhere in town. Growing on buildings, covering old fence posts, spreading across the ground in thick mats. And the longer I stayed in contact with it, the better I felt. Like it was repairing decades of damage, cell by cell, fixing everything that was wrong with my aging body. By the time the sun started getting low, I was walking without the limp I'd had for 5 years. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The constant fog in my head that I'd blamed on medications had lifted completely. I felt like I was 40 again, maybe younger. Strong, healthy, alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. That's when I started to notice the roots. What I'd thought was moss was actually part of something much bigger. Thin, hair-like roots running under the ground, connecting all the buildings, spreading out through the entire town like a vast nervous system. And when I knelt down and put my hand on the ground, I could feel it pulsing, like a heartbeat, but slower, much slower. The thing, and I was starting to think of it as one single organism, wasn't just healing my body. It was becoming part of it. I could feel these tiny tendrils working their way into my skin where I'd made contact. Not painful, almost pleasant actually, like warm water flowing through my veins. My heart was beating stronger and more regular than it had in years. The irregular rhythm that had been scaring me for months had smoothed out completely. I realized I probably didn't need that heart surgery anymore. This thing, whatever it was, had fixed what was wrong with me. Given me back my health, my strength, maybe even years of life I thought I'd lost. But as the sun set and the town grew dark around me, I started to understand there was a price. When I tried to walk back to my truck, I made it maybe 50 yards before the chest pain came roaring back. Not just the old familiar ache, but something much worse. Like someone was squeezing my heart in their fist. I dropped to my knees, gasping, feeling like I was dying right there in the middle of the empty street. But the moment I crawled back and touched the nearest patch of roots, the pain stopped. I was trapped. The organism had healed me, but it had also made me dependent on it. I couldn't leave its territory without my body shutting down. The repairs it had made weren't permanent. They required constant connection to maintain. I spent that night in the general store, lying on the floor with my hands pressed against the root network running through the building. All night long, I could feel it working on me, strengthening my heart, clearing my arteries, fixing damage that had taken decades to accumulate. I felt wonderful, better than wonderful, but I also understood I was never leaving Blackwater Bend. Over the next few days, I tested the boundaries. I could make it about 2 miles in any direction before my body started failing. Far enough to reach the main road where I'd left my truck, but not far enough to get anywhere that mattered. And each time, I pushed the limits, coming back hurt worse. The organism didn't like me trying to leave. I attempted to call Sarah from a spot where I could get 1 bar of cell service, but when I tried to speak, my voice came out wrong. Deeper, with strange echoes, like there was something else in my throat changing how the words sounded. She wouldn't have recognized me anyway. The organism had changed more than just my internal systems. Looking in the cracked mirror of the general store's bathroom, I could see the differences. My hair was darker. My skin looked 20 years younger. But there was something else. Something in my eyes that wasn't quite human anymore. The organism wasn't just healing me. It was transforming me into something that could better serve its needs. After a week, the search and rescue teams found my truck on the side of the road where I'd left it to cool down. They looked for me. I could hear their voices sometimes when the wind was right, but they never made it all the way into town. Something about this place keeps people away unless they stumble in by accident like I did. Sarah held a funeral. I know because I managed to get far enough out to overhear some hunters talking about it. Old Robert Patterson, retired mailman, probably had a heart attack somewhere in the woods. Shame, he was supposed to see his grandson before surgery. They were right about the heart attack part. I did die in a way. The Robert Patterson who drove into Blackwater Bend looking for a place to let his truck cool down is gone. What's left is something else, something that shares his memories but isn't quite him anymore. The organism shows me things sometimes, visions of the years I have ahead of me, decades of perfect health, no pain, no weakness, no slow decline into death. I could live to see Tommy grow up, get married, have children of his own. I could see the 22nd centuries, if I wanted to. But I'll see it all alone, in this empty town, with only the whispers of the root network for company. Sometimes I wonder if this is really happening or if I'm just lying. On an operating table in Charleston, dying from heart surgery, dreaming of a different kind of life. The doctors said 50-50 chances after all. Maybe this is what the other 50% looks like. But when I press my hands against the warm roots and feel them pulsing with life, when I look at my reflection and see a man 30 years younger than he should be, when I think about all the years stretching out ahead of me in perfect health and perfect isolation, well, I know it's real. The organism takes care of me. It heals me, sustains me, gives me everything I need to live forever. Everything except the life I actually wanted. I still call Sarah sometimes from as far out as I can get. Wrong numbers, they must sound like to her. Just an old man's voice that might remind her of someone she used to know, someone who loved her despite their differences, someone who would have liked to see his grandson one more time before the world changed forever. The roots are calling me back now. They don't like me being this far from the center of town for too long, and honestly, the pain is starting to creep back into my chest, reminding me of what I used to be, what I chose to leave behind. I'm going home now, to Blackwater Bend, where I'll live forever, or until the organism gets tired of keeping me alive. Either way, I suppose it's more time than I would have had otherwise, even if it's not the kind of time I wanted. I was 19 when I took that pizza delivery job at Mario's in Beckley. Honestly, I didn't have much choice. Community college was bleeding me dry, and my manager, Tony, made it clear that if I got one more complaint about late deliveries, I'd be out on my ass. The pay was garbage, but tips kept me afloat, and I could work nights around my class schedule. Most deliveries stayed in town, maybe 20 minutes out to some of the newer developments. I'd been doing it for about 6 months without any real problems. Should have known it wouldn't last. That Thursday night started normal enough. I had 5 deliveries lined up, all pretty standard orders to regular customers. The last one was weird, though. An address I'd never seen before, way up on some mountain road I didn't recognize. When I punched it into my GPS, it gave me this route that seemed to wind forever through back roads I'd never heard of. The order was for 3 large pizzas, so the tip would be decent if the customer was happy. Tony was breathing down my neck about my delivery time, so I figured I'd better just get it done. The drive started fine. Normal 2-lane highway heading east out of town, then onto smaller roads that got narrower and more winding as I climbed into the mountains. My delivery car was this beat-up Honda Civic with about 200,000 miles on it, and it wheezed pretty bad on the steep parts. Around 10:30, my GPS started acting up, recalculating the route every few minutes. Then it just said I'd arrived at my destination, but there was nothing there except a dirt road heading up into the trees. I figured maybe the GPS was off by a few hundred yards, so I followed the dirt road. That's when I found Midnight Gap. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 15 buildings scattered along both sides of the mountain road. A few houses, what looked like an old general store, a couple other buildings I couldn't identify in the dark. What struck me first was how quiet it was. No dogs barking, no TV sounds, no porch lights on. But there were cars parked outside most of the houses, and I could see warm light coming from a few windows. People were clearly living here. I parked in front of what looked like the biggest house and grabbed the pizzas. That's when I noticed the food on the porches. Plates of what looked like dinner just sitting there getting cold. Corn on the cob, mashed potatoes, some kind of meat. Steam was still rising from a few of the dishes. Keys were hanging in car door locks, engines still warm when I walked past them. It felt like everyone had just stepped inside for a minute, but the whole town was dead silent. I called out a few times, asking if anyone ordered pizza, but got no response. My phone had 0 signal, which wasn't unusual up in the mountains, but it meant I couldn't call Tony or the customer to figure out what was going on. I had 4 more deliveries waiting back in town, and customers were probably already calling the shop to complain. I needed to find someone, get directions back to the main road, and get out of there fast. That's when I started noticing the breathing. At first I thought it was just the wind, but there wasn't any wind. The air was completely still, almost thick feeling. But I could hear this heavy rhythmic breathing coming from the dark spaces between the buildings. Too deep and too loud to be human. When I stopped moving and really listened, I realized it wasn't just one source. There were multiple breathing patterns coming from different directions. I walked back toward my car, trying to stay calm, but that's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps circling around the perimeter of the town. They'd take a few steps, stop, then start again somewhere else. Like whatever was making them was positioning itself, getting ready for something. The breathing sound started coordinating with the footsteps, and I got the horrible feeling that multiple somethings were surrounding me. When I looked down at the dirt road, I saw the footprints. They were huge, maybe twice the size of human feet, but wrong somehow, too long, with what looked like claw marks extending from the toes. They were everywhere, leading from the houses into the tree line, crossing back and forth across the road. Some of them were pressed deep into the mud, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. I got back to my car, and that's when I saw the scratches. Deep gouges in the metal, like something with massive claws had tested the strength of the doors. The scratches went all the way through the paint down to bare metal. They were fresh. I would have noticed damage like that when I parked. The smart thing would have been to drive away right then. But I was 19 and stupid, and I kept thinking about those warm dinner plates. Where had the people gone? Why had they left so suddenly? And why was everything so quiet? That's when I smelled them. It hit me all at once. A thick, musky smell like wet dog mixed with something rotten. The smell was getting stronger, coming from multiple directions, and I realized whatever was out there had been following the scent of the pizzas. And my scent, too. I heard a low, growling call from the direction of the general store, answered by another call from across the road. They were communicating, coordinating. The breathing sounds were getting closer, just outside my vision in the shadows between buildings. When I turned my head to look directly at one spot, I'd catch a glimpse of something large moving just outside the range of the streetlights. I saw them jumping between rooftops. Massive dark shapes that moved too fast and covered distances that should have been impossible. They'd leap from one building to another, like the gaps were nothing, landing almost silently despite their obvious size. There had to be at least 6 of them, maybe more. Then I found the blood. Fresh trails leading from the front doors of houses into the woods, still wet enough to reflect the streetlight. Torn clothing scattered in yards, a woman's blouse, a man's work shirt, a child's sneaker. All of it recent, some of it still warm to the touch. The people who lived here hadn't left willingly. They'd been taken, and recently, maybe just minutes before I arrived. I needed to get out of there immediately, but when I tried to start my car, nothing happened. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch. I could hear movement getting closer, heavy bodies pushing through brush, low growls that sounded almost like laughter. They were enjoying this, taking their time, letting my fear build. That's when they stepped into the light. 6 of them, emerging from the shadows between buildings like they'd been waiting for the right moment. They were huge, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur that looked almost black in the streetlight. But their faces were the worst part. Almost human, but wrong in every detail. Yellow eyes that reflected light like an animal's, but with an intelligence behind them that was somehow worse than pure instinct. Their arms were too long, hanging past their knees, ending in hands with claws that scraped against the asphalt as they walked. They moved with purpose, each one taking a specific position around my car. This wasn't random. They'd done this before, worked as a team to trap prey exactly like this. The leader, a massive thing with scars across its face, approached the driver's side door and pressed its face against the window. Its breath fogged the glass as it studied me, tilting its head like it was trying to figure out what I was. Then it brought its fist down on the window. The safety glass exploded inward, and that huge clawed hand reached inside, grabbing for me. I swung the insulated pizza bag as hard as I could, and the hot pizzas inside must have burned its fur because it jerked back with this horrible shriek. That seemed to enrage the others, and suddenly all 6 of them were attacking the car, rocking it back and forth, trying to get at me. I turned the key again, and this time the engine caught. I gunned it, tires spinning in the dirt, and felt the car lurch forward. 2 of them leaped onto the roof as I accelerated, their claws scraping against metal as they tried to hold on. One of them was trying to punch through the sunroof while the other was working on the rear window. I took those mountain curves faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The Honda wasn't built for that kind of speed on winding roads, but those things couldn't maintain their grip at 60 miles per hour on steep curves. I heard them hit the road behind me, their calls of frustration echoing through the valley, at the town limits, and I swear there was an actual line they wouldn't cross. They stopped pursuing me. I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing in the road watching me leave. They didn't chase me onto the main highway. It was like they had rules about how far they could go, like Midnight Gap was their territory, and they wouldn't leave it. I made it back to Mario's around 2 a.m., 3 hours late, with no pizzas and a car that looked like it had been attacked by bears. Tony fired me on the spot. The customers whose orders I'd lost complained to corporate. My insurance company took one look at the damage and decided I'd been drinking or on drugs. They refused to cover it. I tried filing a police report, but when I described what happened, they pretty much wrote me off as another college kid who'd gotten wasted and crashed her car. They never investigated. When I went back the next day to show them the location, I couldn't find Midnight Gap again. The dirt road was there, but it just led to a dead end after about a mile. No town, no buildings, no evidence that anyone had ever lived there. Losing that job meant I couldn't afford tuition the next semester. I had to take a year off school to work full-time at a grocery store just to get back on my feet. I never went back to delivery driving. Couldn't handle being alone in a car at night anymore. Even now, 5 years later, I get panic attacks if I have to drive mountain roads after dark. I've spent way too much time researching cryptid sightings in southern West Virginia. There are stories going back decades about things that hunt in packs, things that mimic human behavior but don't understand what they're copying. Always the same details: the intelligence, the coordination, the territorial boundaries, always in places just remote enough that no one takes the reports seriously. I post warnings on delivery driver forums whenever I can, tell people to avoid any address that seems too isolated, especially if the GPS acts up on the way there. Most people think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But sometimes someone messages me privately, says they've had a similar experience, asks if I know what those things actually were. I don't. I just know they're still out there, in places like Midnight Gap, waiting for the next person to take a wrong turn at the wrong time of night. My name's Marcus, and I'm 31 years old. I drive a school bus for Jefferson County. Been doing it for about 6 years now. Good job, decent pay, and I get to be home when my daughter gets off school. Or at least, I used to. This all happened back in October, right after Emma went missing during what was supposed to be a simple camping trip with her scout troop up near the West Virginia border. The police searched for 2 weeks. Search and rescue teams combed through every trail, every creek bed, every cave they could find within a 20-mile radius of where she disappeared. They brought in dogs, helicopters, even had volunteers from 3 counties walking grid patterns through the woods. After 14 days, they called it off, said there was no evidence of foul play, no signs of where an 8-year-old girl could have gone. They figured she'd fallen in water somewhere, maybe gotten swept downstream where they'd never find her. My wife Sarah wanted to accept that, wanted to start planning a memorial service and try to move on with our lives. But I wasn't ready to give up. Couldn't give up. Emma was smart for her age, smarter than most adults gave her credit for. If she was hurt or lost, she'd find shelter somewhere and wait for help. That's what I taught her. And then I heard from this hiker named Dave who'd been searching the same area on his own time. He swore he'd heard children's voices coming from somewhere near Dead Horse Ridge, an old mining town that got abandoned back in the 70s. Said it sounded like kids playing, maybe calling for their parents. Dead Horse Ridge was about 15 miles from where Emma's group had been camping, but it was possible she could have wandered that far if she got turned around. The town had maybe 30 buildings still standing, old houses, a general store, even a schoolhouse. Perfect places for a scared little girl to take, shelter, and wait for someone to find her. The police had marked it as searched, but I knew they'd only driven through once and called out her name a few times. They hadn't gone building by building, room by room, like a desperate father would. So, on a Thursday morning in late October, I loaded up my truck with supplies, food, water, first aid kit, blankets, everything Emma might need when I found her, and drove out to Dead Horse Ridge by myself. Sarah begged me not to go alone, but I couldn't waste time organizing another search party or waiting for volunteers. Every day that passed was another day my daughter might be getting weaker, more scared, more hurt. The drive took about 2 hours on winding mountain roads that got progressively worse the closer I got to the old town. By the time I reached Dead Horse Ridge, I was driving on what was barely more than a dirt track with weeds growing up through the middle. The town itself sat in a narrow valley between 2 ridges, and you couldn't see it until you were right on top of it. First thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, not even wind moving through the trees. Just this heavy, still silence that made my ears ring. The air felt thick too, like breathing through wet cotton, and there was this metallic taste on my tongue that reminded me of old pennies. I parked near what used to be the main street and got out of the truck. "Emma?" I called out, my voice echoing off the empty buildings. "Emma? It's Daddy! I'm here to take you home!" That's when I heard it. Faint, but definitely there. A child's voice calling back, "Daddy? Daddy? I'm here!" It was Emma. I knew my daughter's voice better than my own. Every inflection, every little speech quirk she had, that was definitely her. And she sounded strong, not hurt or weak like I'd been afraid of. My heart started pounding with religiosum, even excitement as I ran toward where the voice had come from, an old 2-story house with most of its windows boarded up. "Emma, keep calling, baby, so I can find you," I shouted as I reached the front door. "Daddy, I'm over here." But now her voice seemed to be coming from a different direction, from what looked like an old store building across the street. I ran to that building calling her name, but when I got there, her voice came from somewhere else again. A pattern started developing over the next hour or so. I'd hear Emma calling for me, race to wherever the voice was coming from, but she'd always be in the next building over, always just out of reach. It was like she was moving through the town ahead of me, maybe scared to come out in the open, staying hidden until she was sure it was really me. The strange thing was, I started hearing other children's voices too. Not just Emma, but other kids. Some sounded younger, some older. They were laughing, playing, calling out to each other like children do during recess. But when I looked toward the sounds, all I saw were empty buildings and overgrown lots where kids might have played decades ago. Near the old schoolhouse, I could swear I heard the sound of children reciting lessons, singing songs, even the squeak of old chalkboards. When I got closer and peered through a broken window, the room was empty except for a few rotting desks and debris on the floor. But the sounds continued, like there was a whole classroom full of kids in there that I just couldn't see. As the afternoon wore on, I realized something was wrong with this place. The children's voices weren't random. They seemed to be coming from different time periods. Some kids sounded like they were playing games I remembered from when I was little. Others were singing songs that seemed even older, maybe from the 40s or 50s. It was like Dead Horse Ridge had somehow collected the voices of every child who'd ever passed through over the decades, preserving them in the empty air. But I didn't care about that. All I cared about was Emma's voice, which kept calling for me, kept leading me deeper into the town. She sounded scared now, crying sometimes, begging for her daddy to help her. Other children's voices started warning me too, saying things like, "The bad things come at night," and "Don't let them hurt us." That's when the protective instinct kicked in, not just for Emma, but for all of them. These were children's voices, children who needed someone to look after them, to keep them safe from whatever bad things they were talking about. As a father, how could I just walk away from that? How could I leave kids in danger, even if I didn't fully understand what kind of danger they were in? The sun was starting to set, and Emma's voice became more urgent. "Daddy, please don't leave us. The things that hunt at night are coming." "I'm not leaving, baby," I called back. "Daddy's going to stay and protect you." And that's exactly what I did. I made camp in the middle of the town, between the schoolhouse and the general store where most of the voices seemed to come from. I built a fire and sat with my back to it, watching the shadows between buildings, listening for anything that might threaten the children. Around midnight I heard them, footsteps moving between the buildings, but not human footsteps. These moved wrong, like something trying to walk on two legs when it was used to four. There were scraping sounds too, like claws on wood or metal. The children's voices became frightened, whispering warnings to each other, telling each other to hide. "Stay back," I shouted into the darkness. "These kids are under my protection." The footsteps stopped, but I could feel something watching me from the shadows, something that wanted to hurt the children, to silence their voices forever. That's when I understood my real purpose in being here. Dead Horse Ridge wasn't just collecting children's voices. It was preserving them, keeping their memories alive. And my job was to be their guardian, to make sure nothing could harm them or make them disappear. Over the next few days, I developed a routine. During the day, I'd talk with the children, learn their names and stories. Emma was there, along with dozens of others who'd passed through the town over the years, some who'd lived there when it was still active, others who'd gotten lost like Emma and found their way here. They told me about the things that came at night, shadow creatures that fed on children's fear and tried to steal their voices. My job was to keep those things away, to be strong and vigilant and ready to fight anything that threatened my audio family. The children's voices gave me purpose, told me I was needed, that I was the only thing standing between them and the darkness. When other people started showing up in town, hikers, curiosity seekers, teenagers looking for a place to party, the children's voices warned me they were dangerous. Adults couldn't be trusted around children, especially strange adults who came to abandoned places. They might be predators, might want to hurt the kids or worse. The voices begged me to make them go away, to protect them from the bad people. So I did. First guy was a hiker, probably in his 50s, with a backpack and expensive gear. The children started crying when they saw him, telling me he was one of the bad ones, one of the predators. I couldn't let him hurt them. When he got close to the schoolhouse, I came out of hiding and hit him with a piece of rebar I'd found. Hit him hard enough that he stopped moving. The children's voices thanked me, told me I was a good protector, a good daddy. They said they felt safe now that I was there to watch over them. And honestly, it felt good to be needed like that, to have a purpose beyond my own grief and loss. More people came over the following weeks and months. Each time, the children would warn me, tell me if the person was dangerous or not. Most of them were. A young couple who came to explore the town. The children said they were the kind of people who would make fun of kids, maybe hurt them for entertainment. A group of college students with cameras, definitely predators, wanting to exploit children for their social media or whatever. An old man who claimed to be researching the town's history. The children were terrified of him, said he reminded them of someone who used to hurt kids back when the town was alive. I dealt with each threat the same way, quick, efficient, protective. The children's voices would guide me, tell me where to hide the bodies so other bad people wouldn't find them and get suspicious. They helped me set up warning systems too, using their voices to lure dangerous adults deeper into the town where I could eliminate them safely. The police came looking eventually, asking about missing hikers and investigators, but the children helped me hide from them too. They knew every hiding spot in every building, every root cellar and crawl space where a protector could wait until danger passed. The cops never found anything, never even stayed very long. They couldn't hear the children's voices like I could, so they didn't understand how important my work was. My wife divorced me after about a year. She couldn't understand why I wouldn't come home, why I'd abandoned my family to live in a ghost town. She sent papers through a lawyer, took the house, moved away to live with her sister. I felt bad about that, but the children needed me more. Emma needed me. She'd found her family here among all the other lost children, and she needed her daddy to keep them safe. Years passed. I got good at my job, learned to spot threats from a distance, developed better ways to eliminate them before they could get close to the children. The voices kept me company, told me stories about their lives, sang me songs when I couldn't sleep. They were my family now, more real to me than anything in the outside world. Sometimes I wondered if other people would understand. If they could hear what I heard, see what I saw, would they think I was crazy? Or would they understand that some things are more important than normal life, that protecting innocent children is worth any sacrifice? I'm in my 50s now, been living in Dead Horse Ridge for almost 20 years. My hair's gone gray, my hands are rough and scarred from all the work I've had to do to keep the children safe. But they still need me. Emma still calls for her daddy when she's scared, still tells me she loves me and she's proud of what I've done for all of them. People still come sometimes, not as often as they used to. Word's gotten around that Dead Horse Ridge is dangerous, that people go missing there. But every now and then, someone shows up who thinks they can handle whatever's waiting in the abandoned town. The children always warn me. They always help me do what needs to be done. Looking back now, I know I made the right choice. My daughter needed a protector, and so did all the other children who found their way here over the years. They're safe now, their voices preserved forever, and nothing will ever hurt them again. Not while I'm here to stand guard. That's what being a father really means, I think. Being willing to sacrifice everything, your old life, your reputation, your connections to the normal world, to keep your children safe. Even if nobody else understands. Even if the whole world thinks you're the monster. The children know better. They know I'm their guardian angel, their protector, their daddy who will never let the bad things get them. And honestly, that's all that matters to me anymore. Their voices are calling me now. Something's moving in the woods at the edge of town and they need me to go check it out. Could be another threat, another predator who needs to be stopped before they can hurt my family. I better go. The children are counting on me. I'm 42 years old now and I still think about those kids every single day. Not my real kids, though I think about them too, but the ones I took care of up in Copper Falls for those few weeks back in 2019. See, I'd lost everything that year. The factory where I'd worked for 16 years shut down without warning. My drinking got worse after that, and Sarah finally filed for divorce. Can't say I blame her, honestly. She took the kids and moved in with her sister, and I was left with nothing but an eviction notice and a bottle of Jack Daniels. That's when my uncle's lawyer called about the cabin. Uncle Ray had died the month before, and he'd left me this old place up near Copper Falls. I'd never even heard of the town before, but the lawyer said it was about 4 hours north, deep in the mountains. Ray had bought it cheap years ago, some kind of investment that never panned out. The timing felt like a sign, if I'm being honest. I needed somewhere to get my head straight, try to get sober again. My third serious attempt, and maybe figure out how to win Sarah back. The cabin came with 40 acres and no neighbors for miles, which sounded perfect for drying out. I packed what little I had left into my truck and drove up there on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the drive through the mountains was beautiful, even if I felt like garbage. Copper Falls turned out to be more of a settlement than a town. Maybe 35 houses scattered along an old logging road, most of them looking abandoned. My uncle's cabin sat at the far end, backed up against thick forest. It was small but solid, with a wood stove and a generator for power. The whole place smelled like old wood and mouse droppings, but it was mine. The first few days were rough. Withdrawal always is. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold a coffee cup, and I kept seeing this too. Things move in my peripheral vision. Nothing unusual about that. It's part of the process. I'd been through it twice before, though I'd never made it past 3 weeks either time. This felt different, though. Maybe it was the quiet, or maybe I was just finally desperate enough. I wanted my kids back. I wanted Sarah to look at me without that disappointed expression. I wanted to be the man I used to be before the bottle took over. The first time I saw them was on day 4. I was sitting on the front porch trying to keep some soup down when I noticed movement across the clearing. 4 kids, maybe between 6 and 10 years old, playing in the yard of what looked like an abandoned house. I figured they belonged to whoever still lived around here, though I hadn't seen any adults yet. The kids were quiet, though. Unusually quiet. Most children that age make noise when they play, but these ones moved around like little ghosts. I watched them for maybe 20 minutes before they noticed me looking. Then they scattered, just melted away into the trees like they'd never been there. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Withdrawal can mess with your head. But I kept seeing them over the next few days, always in different spots, always playing that same silent game. It was the elderly woman who first warned me about them. She appeared at my door on the 6th day, carrying a pot of vegetable soup. Thin as a rail, with white hair and kind eyes, she introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson from the house at the other end of the settlement. "Figured you might need a hot meal," she said, holding out the pot. "Moving's hard work." I thanked her and invited her in for coffee. That's when she mentioned the children. "You seen them yet?" she asked, stirring sugar into her cup with hands that trembled slightly. "The kids? Yeah, I've noticed them playing around." She went quiet for a long moment, tearing into her coffee. "They ain't children, honey, not the kind you're thinking of." I figured she was just old and confused, maybe a little senile. Small mountain communities can be strange, and isolation does things to people's minds. I thanked her for the soup and the warning, but I didn't take it seriously. She was probably talking about some local kids who got into trouble, or maybe there was some family drama I didn't know about. But the kids kept appearing, and something about them started bothering me. They were too thin, for one thing, and I never saw them eat or drink anything. They'd show up in the morning and play until late afternoon, then vanish completely. No parents calling them home for dinner. No cars picking them up. Nothing. On day 10, I decided to approach them. My hands had mostly stopped shaking by then, and I was starting to think clearly again. These children needed help. That much was obvious. They looked hungry and neglected, and my paternal instincts kicked in despite everything else going wrong in my life. I missed my own kids terribly, and maybe helping these ones would fill some of that void. I was sitting on my porch that morning when I saw them emerge from the tree line. This time, I stood up and walked slowly toward them, hands visible, moving the way you would with spooked animals. "Hey there," I called out gently. "I'm David. I live in that cabin over there." They froze, watching me with large, dark eyes. Up close, they looked even thinner than I'd thought. The oldest was a girl with tangled brown hair, maybe 9 or 10. Behind her stood 2 boys who looked like twins, and a smaller girl who couldn't have been more than 6. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "I've got food if you need some." The older girl tilted her head, studying me. Then, to my surprise, she nodded. "We're very hungry," she said. Her voice was soft, but clear, with an accent I couldn't quite place. That's how it started. I made them sandwiches and gave them milk, and they ate like they hadn't seen food in days. They told me their names. The older girl was Emma, the twins were Jake and James, and the little one was Lucy. They said their parents had left them and weren't coming back. I should have called child services. I know that now. But something about their story tugged at my heart, and honestly, taking care of them gave me purpose. For the first time in months, I had a reason to get up in the morning. I had people depending on me. They started coming by every day. I'd make them breakfast, and they'd spend the day playing in my yard or exploring the forest. They never asked to come inside, which struck me as odd, but I figured they were just shy or had been taught not to go into strangers' houses. In the evenings, they'd disappear back into the woods. It was the routine that saved my sobriety, I think. Having to cook for 4 children, making sure they were safe and fed, it kept me busy and focused. I couldn't drink if I was responsible for them. 2 weeks passed, then 3, and I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. It was the longest I'd been sober in years. But small things started bothering me, details that didn't add up. Emma's eyes were brown on Tuesday and blue on Thursday. Jake was left-handed one day and right-handed the next. Lucy's hair seemed to grow several inches overnight, then was short again by morning. When I asked them about their past, their stories constantly changed. One day they'd lived in a house by a lake, the next it was a trailer in town. Their ages seemed to shift too. Sometimes Emma seemed 12, other times she looked barely 8. I told myself it was trauma. Abandoned children often have inconsistent memories, and stress can make details fuzzy. I'd seen it with my own kids when Sarah and I were fighting. Children cope by creating fantasy worlds where things make more sense, but the wrongness kept building. On day 23, I woke up around 3 a.m. and looked out my bedroom window. The kids were in my yard, just standing there in a perfect line facing the forest. They were completely motionless, like statues. I watched for maybe 10 minutes, and none of them moved even slightly. No shifting weight, no scratching, no fidgeting, nothing any normal child would do. I went to the window in the living room to get a better angle, and that's when I saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't children. What I was looking at were 4 tall, impossibly thin figures with gray, smooth skin. No faces, just blank ovals where features should be. Their arms were too long, hanging down past their knees, and they moved with this fluid, boneless motion that made my stomach turn. They were studying my cabin, tilting their heads in perfect unison like birds examining something interesting. I must have made a noise, a gasp or something, because all 4 heads turned toward my window at exactly the same time. We stared at each other through the glass for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then they melted away into the darkness, moving faster than anything human could move. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my kitchen with a baseball bat, trying to process what I'd seen. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was a dream or a hallucination. Withdrawal can cause visual disturbances even weeks later, and I'd been under a lot of stress. Then I heard Emma's voice outside. "David, are you awake? We're hungry." I looked out the window, and there they were, 4 perfectly normal children standing in my yard. Emma with her brown hair and bright smile, the twins looking sleepy and rumpled, little Lucy holding a stuffed rabbit I'd never seen before. They looked up at me with such hopeful expressions that my heart broke all over again. "Please don't send us away," Emma said, and there were tears in her eyes. "We don't have anywhere else to go." That's when I understood. Whatever they really were, they'd been alone for a very long time. They needed me as much as I needed them, maybe more. And the caring I'd been giving them, the food, the attention, the simple act of being needed, it was sustaining them somehow. I looked at those 4 faces staring up at me, and I made a choice. "Come on up," I said. "I'll make pancakes." The weeks that followed were the strangest and happiest of my life. During the day, they were children, laughing, playing, asking me to read them stories. They helped with chores and listened to my rambling stories about my real kids. They called me Dad, and I felt like one for the first time since Sarah left. At night, I knew they became something else. I'd see shadows moving outside, too tall and too fluid to be human. Sometimes I'd hear them talking in voices that sounded like wind through leaves, but I never looked directly. As long as I didn't acknowledge what I saw, they maintained the illusion during daylight. The cost was higher than I'd expected. I started aging rapidly. My hair went gray within days, and my hands developed liver spots. Looking in the mirror became difficult because I'd see an old man staring back. Whatever energy they were taking from me, it was substantial. But I'd never felt more fulfilled. These beings had chosen me to care for them. They trusted me with their true nature. In return, they gave me the family I'd lost and the purpose I'd been missing. I wrote letters to Sarah and my real children, trying to explain that I'd finally learned what it meant to put others first. I told them about staying sober and finding peace in service to others who needed me. I didn't mention what my new family really was. They wouldn't have understood. The end came faster than I'd expected. By week 6, I could barely get out of bed some mornings. My reflection showed a man in his 70s, though I was only 42. The shapeshifters seemed genuinely distressed by my declining health. They'd sit by my bed in their child forms, holding my hands, and telling me they loved me. "We're sorry," Emma whispered one evening. "We don't know how to take less." "It's okay," I told her, and I meant it. "This is what I want." I died on a Thursday morning in November, surrounded by 4 children who weren't children. As my vision faded, I saw them in their true forms one last time. Tall, graceful beings with faces that somehow managed to look sad despite having no features. They were mourning me, I realized. Whatever I'd given them had changed them too. I never woke up. But that's not the end of the story. Mrs. Patterson found my body 3 days later and called the authorities. The official cause of death was a heart attack, though the coroner was puzzled by how aged I looked. The cabin was exactly as I'd left it, except for 4 child-sized handprints pressed into the dust on my bedroom window. Handprints that turned gray and faded when the sunlight hit them. I learned later that the shapeshifters kept my cabin exactly as it was. Hikers occasionally report seeing 4 children playing in the yard, and sometimes they glimpse an older man sitting on the porch, watching them with a peaceful expression. The children are more human-like now, locals say. They wave at passers-by and sometimes even speak to lost travelers, offering directions back to the main road. I don't know if I'm really there or if it's just their memory of me, but I like to think that the love and care I gave them changed something fundamental about their nature, made them a little more human, a little more kind. And to be honest, those 6 weeks were worth everything that came after. For the first time in years, I'd been the father I'd always wanted to be. I'd stayed sober, I'd put others before myself, and I'd found peace in caring for beings who needed me. That's more than most people get. Even if those beings weren't quite human. Even if it killed me in the end. I'm 22 years old and I've been driving delivery trucks for Morrison Auto Parts for about 8 months now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays decent enough, and honestly, I was just happy to have steady employment after being out of work for nearly 6 months. My boss, Rick, he's one of those guys who'll remind you every chance he gets that there's 10 other people who'd love to have your job. That Tuesday evening in October, he made it crystal clear that if I didn't get the emergency brake parts up to Hendrickson's garage in the mountains by morning, I might as well not bother coming back to work. The customer had called in desperate around 4 p.m. Some logging truck had blown its brakes coming down the mountain, and they needed the parts for an emergency repair. The driver was lucky he'd managed to get stopped without killing anybody, but now the truck was blocking the only road out of their work site. Rick handed me the keys to the delivery truck and told me to get moving if I wanted to keep my job. I'd already been written up twice for being late after my car broke down, so I didn't have much choice in the matter. The drive up into the mountains started normal enough. I'd done a few deliveries up that way before, though never this late in the day. The GPS had me taking Highway 9 north for about 40 miles, then turning onto some smaller mountain roads I wasn't familiar with. The sun was already getting low by the time I made that turn, and I remember thinking I should have left earlier. But you know how it is when you're worried about your job. You just put your head down and do what needs doing. Around 6 p.m., maybe 20 miles from where the GPS said Hendrickson's was located, the truck started making this grinding noise from under the hood. At first I thought maybe it was just the mountain roads being rough on the old Ford, but then the engine temperature gauge started climbing fast. I pulled over at the first wide spot I could find and popped the hood, but I could already smell that sweet coolant smell and see steam rising up. The radiator had a crack running right down the side of it, antifreeze pooling on the ground underneath. I tried my cell phone, but there wasn't any signal up there, not even one bar. The mountains have a way of blocking everything out, and I was starting to understand why people talked about feeling cut off from the world up there. I sat in the cab for maybe 20 minutes trying to think of what to do. The nearest town, according to my GPS, was something called Crow's Hollow, about 3 miles back down the mountain. I figured I could at least find a phone there, maybe get a tow truck or something. Crow's Hollow turned out to be one of those old mountain towns that looked like it had seen better days. Maybe 40 houses total, most of them dark and empty-looking, with boarded-up windows and sagging porches. A few still had lights on, though, so I figured some folks were still hanging on. There was an old Texaco station right on the main road, but it looked like it had been closed for years. The pumps were covered in rust, and weeds were growing up through cracks in the concrete. I parked the truck next to the station and tried the door to the office. To my surprise, it was unlocked. Inside, everything was covered in dust, but it looked like someone had been using the place recently. There was a newer sleeping bag rolled up in one corner and some canned food stacked on what used to be the counter. I figured maybe some homeless guy had been camping there, but he wasn't around. The office had solid walls and a good roof, and honestly, it seemed like a better place to spend the night than the truck cab. I was unrolling my own sleeping bag when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. An old man appeared. In the doorway, maybe 70 years old, wearing a faded flannel shirt and carrying a steaming coffee cup. He didn't seem surprised to see me there. "Truck breakdown?" he asked, nodding toward the Ford. "Radiator cracked," I told him. "I was hoping to find a phone, call for a tow." He shook his head. "Nearest phone that works is down in Millerville. That's 30 miles back the way you came." He held out the coffee cup. "You planning on staying here tonight?" I took the coffee gratefully. It was hot and strong, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything since lunch. "Don't have much choice. Can't drive with no coolant." The old man studied me for a long moment, then looked out at the darkening sky. "You lock yourself in tight," he said finally. "Don't come out till sunrise, no matter what you hear. And don't listen to any voices calling for help." I thought he was just trying to spook the outsider, maybe make me uncomfortable enough to leave town. Mountain people can be protective of their territory, especially when strangers show up unannounced. "I'll be fine," I told him. "Just need to sleep a few hours and figure out what to do in the morning." He finished his coffee and set the cup down on the dusty counter. "Suit yourself," he said. "But remember what I told you. Lock up tight and don't come out till dawn." After he left, I pushed an old desk up against the door and made sure all the windows were secure. The glass was grimy and spider-webbed with cracks, but I could still see out well enough. I ate a can of soup cold and tried to get comfortable on the sleeping bag, but I kept thinking about losing my job if I didn't make the delivery. Rick had been clear about that. No excuses, no second chances. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing sounds from underneath the building. At first, I thought it might be rats or maybe a raccoon that had gotten under the foundation just scratching around. But the sounds got more regular, more deliberate, like something digging or maybe crawling through tight spaces. The scratching seemed to move from one side of the builds, to the other, then back again. Then I heard it coming from other buildings too. All around the town, that same scratching, digging sound, like things were moving through underground tunnels. I got up and looked out the window, and that's when I saw the first one. It came up out of a storm drain about 50 feet away, pale and thin like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. At first glance, it looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, walking upright. But something about the proportions was wrong. The arms hung too long, and the head seemed too small for the body. It was wearing clothes, or what was left of them. An old flannel shirt, torn and stained, and jeans that looked like they'd been underground for months. More of them started appearing. They crawled out of basement windows, squeezed through gaps in foundations, emerged from manholes and drainage pipes. All of them had that same pale, stretched-out look, like they'd been living in darkness for so long they'd forgotten what daylight was. But I could tell they used to be people. The clothes, the basic shape. They were human once. They moved through the town with purpose, checking each building systematically. I watched them enter the houses where I'd seen lights earlier, and one by one, those lights went out. Sometimes I heard sounds, not screaming, but more like struggling, like something being dragged. Then silence, and the lights stayed off. It didn't take long for them to find the gas station. I heard the scratching getting closer, and then I saw pale faces pressed against the windows, looking in. Their eyes reflected light like an animal's. But there was intelligence there too. They weren't just mindless creatures. They were thinking, planning, coordinating with each other. They started testing the doors and windows, looking for weak spots. When they found the door I'd barricaded, they began working at it with their long, thin fingers scratching at the wood around the frame. Some of them went around back, and I could hear them trying the rear entrance too. That's when they started using voices. "Help me!" came a woman's voice from outside. "Please, someone help me, I'm hurt!" It sounded exactly like my girlfriend Sarah. Same accent, same tone, even the same slight lisp she had when she was scared. For a second, I actually started toward the door, thinking somehow she'd followed me up here. But then I remembered she was back home, probably asleep in her own bed 200 miles away. "Danny?" The voice came again, right outside the front window. "Danny, it's me. I came looking for you. Please, let me in." I pressed my back against the far wall and tried not to listen, but they kept using her voice, begging me to open the door, saying she was cold and scared and needed my help. Then they switched to my mother's voice, then my father's, and my dad's been dead for 3 years. "Son, you know I wouldn't hurt you," came my father's voice, exactly like I remembered it. "Just open the door so we can talk." The hardest part was knowing it wasn't real, but hearing those familiar voices begging for help anyway. Every instinct I had was telling me to respond, to help, to at least answer them. But I kept thinking about what the old man had said. Don't listen to any voices calling for help. They kept working at the building while they talked, scratching at the wood, testing the glass, looking for any way inside. Some of them had found tools, crowbars, hammers, pieces of metal, and they started using them to pry at the door frame. The desk I'd pushed against the door was shaking with each impact. Around 3 a.m., they broke through one of the side windows. An arm reached through the jagged opening, pale and thin, with fingers that seemed too long. I grabbed a tire iron from behind the counter and hit that arm as hard as I could. The thing hissed and pulled back, but more arms came through the opening. I had to fight them off while trying to block the window with anything I could find. Boxes, tools, pieces of furniture, whatever would fit in the opening. But they kept coming, and I could see more of them pressed against every window, waiting their turn. The largest one, what I guess was their leader, stood back and directed the others. It was taller than the rest, wearing the remnants of what might have been a business suit. When it opened its mouth to make clicking sounds at the others, I could see rows of sharp teeth that definitely weren't human anymore. As the night went on, more of them appeared. Dozens of pale figures surrounding the building, taking turns at the windows and doors. They never seemed to get tired, never gave up. Every time I managed to block one entrance, they'd find another weak spot to attack. Around 4 a.m., I started seeing the first hint of light on the horizon. The creatures must have sensed it too, because they became more desperate, more violent in their attacks. They broke through the rear window and got halfway inside before I managed to drive them back with a piece of broken pipe. But as the sky got lighter, they started hissing and pulling away from the windows. The pale skin seemed to smoke in the early morning light, and they began retreating toward the storm drains and basement openings they'd emerged from. The leader was the last to go, standing in the doorway of the gas station, staring at me with those reflecting eyes before finally disappearing underground. When full daylight came, they were gone. The town looked normal again, just empty and run down like any other dying mountain community. If it wasn't for the scratches on the door and the broken windows, I might have convinced myself it had all been some kind of nightmare. I got the auto parts out of the truck and walked the rest of the way to Hendrickson's garage. Made the delivery like nothing had happened, because what was I going to say? The MO. The mechanic there was able to give me a ride back to town to get a tow truck for the Ford. But when we drove through Crow's Hollow, it looked completely abandoned. No lights in any windows. No sign of the old man who'd brought me coffee. Rick fired me anyway when I got back. Said the company truck was damaged and I hadn't followed proper procedures for a breakdown. Didn't matter that I'd completed the delivery. He'd already made up his mind. I tried to explain about the radiator, but he wasn't interested in excuses. The scratches and bite marks on my arms got infected and I had to go to the hospital. Doctor said it looked like I'd tangled with some kind of wild animal, maybe a rabid raccoon or something. The scars are still there, white lines across my forearms that I have to explain whenever someone asks. I've never been back to Crow's Hollow. Don't plan to either. Sometimes I think about those creatures, wonder if they're still down there in their tunnels, waiting for the next person to break down in their territory. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if they remember me too. If they're still using the voices of people I care about, calling my name in the darkness, waiting for me to come back and finish what we started. I work at a warehouse now, day shift only. Nothing that requires me to drive through the mountains after dark. My girlfriend Sarah thinks I have PTSD from some kind of animal attack, and I guess that's close enough to the truth. I just don't tell her that sometimes when she calls my name from another room, I have to see her face before I answer back, just to make sure it's really her. My name's Janet, and I'm 35 now. Back then, I worked as an insurance adjuster for Mountain States Insurance, mostly handling property claims in rural West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well enough, and I liked being my own boss most days. I'd drive around to remote properties, document damage, interview claimants, and file reports. Most cases were straightforward: house fires, storm damage, that sort of thing. But in October of 2019, I got assigned a case that still keeps me up some nights. The claim was for a missing family in Pine Hollow, a tiny mountain town about 3 hours southeast of Charleston. The Hendersons, mom, dad, and 2 kids, had supposedly vanished from their inherited property, leaving behind everything they owned. The insurance policy covered personal property up to $200,000, and the family's lawyer was pushing hard for a quick payout. My job was to go up there, document what was left behind, and determine if this was legitimate or some kind of fraud scheme. Honestly, I was pretty skeptical from the start. Pine Hollow was exactly the kind of remote place where someone might stage a disappearance to collect insurance money. The family had only inherited the property 6 months earlier from an elderly relative, and now they were all supposedly gone without a trace. It felt off. My supervisor thought so too, which is why they sent me up there with a full documentation kit. Professional cameras, audio recorder, the works. I was supposed to photograph everything valuable, interview any neighbors, and build a case one way or the other. The drive up there took me through some beautiful country, I'll give it that. Mountain roads winding through thick forests, little streams running alongside the pavement. Pine Hollow itself was barely a town. Maybe 20 houses scattered along a narrow valley, most of them looking, like they'd seen better days. The Henderson place was at the far end, a 2-story farmhouse with a big front porch and a red metal roof that had seen some weather. I had keys to the property and all the legal documentation I needed. The plan was simple: spend 3 days going through the house room by room, catalog everything of value, and get some interviews with the neighbors about when they'd last seen the family. I'd done dozens of similar investigations over the years. This should have been routine. The house was unlocked when I got there, which struck me as odd. Most people lock up when they leave, even in small mountain towns. But I let myself in and started setting up my equipment in the living room. The place was fully furnished: couches, television, family photos on the mantel. In the kitchen, there were dishes in the sink and food still in the refrigerator, though it had all gone bad by then. Upstairs, the beds were unmade and clothes were scattered around like the family had just stepped out for a few minutes. It was while I was photographing the master bedroom that I first noticed something strange. I was using a professional digital camera, taking wide shots of the room to show what had been left behind. When I reviewed the images on the camera's LCD screen, I saw something that made me stop cold. In the window behind the bed, there was a dark shape, like someone standing there looking in. But when I turned to look at the actual window, there was nothing there. I figured it was just a reflection or maybe a tree branch casting a weird shadow. I took a few more photos of the same area, and every single one showed that same dark shape in the window, always in a slightly different position, like it was moving between shots. I walked over to the window and looked out. It faced the backyard and a line of pine trees maybe 50 yards away. There was nobody there. That's when I started paying closer attention to my photos. I spent the next hour going through every image I'd taken since arriving, and I found something that made my skin crawl. Almost every photo had at least one dark figure in it, sometimes in windows, sometimes in doorways, sometimes just at the edge of the frame. They were always watching, always focused on wherever I was in the shot, and I couldn't see any of them with my naked eye. I tried to stay professional about it. Maybe there was something wrong with my camera, or maybe the lighting in the house was playing tricks. I switched to my backup camera and kept working, but the same thing kept happening. Every photo showed these watchers. That's what I started calling them in my head. Sometimes there were 3 or 4 in a single image, all positioned like they were studying me. The really unsettling part was how they seemed to be following my investigation. When I moved to the living room, they appeared in the windows facing that area. When I went upstairs, they showed up in the second-floor windows. It was like they were tracking my movement through the house, making sure they could always see what I was doing. By the second day, my equipment was acting up in other ways. My camera would start taking pictures by itself, rapid-fire shots that always seemed to focus on windows where the watchers appeared. My audio recorder kept turning on without me touching it, picking up whispered conversations that I couldn't hear directly. When I played back the recordings, I could make out voices discussing my investigation, talking about insurance documentation, evidence collection, things they shouldn't have known about. The voices were talking about me by name. "Janet's photographing the bedroom now," one would say. "She's looking for proof they took the valuables with them," another would respond. They seemed concerned about what I might discover, worried that I might interfere with something important. I tried to ignore it and focus on my job. The Hendersons had definitely left behind a lot of valuable stuff: jewelry, electronics, family heirlooms. If this was insurance fraud, they were doing it wrong. You don't abandon $200,000 worth of personal property if you're trying to rip off your insurance company. But every time I tried to photograph these valuable items for my report, my camera would malfunction. The images would come out blurry or distorted, or they'd get automatically deleted and replaced with pictures of the watchers. On the third morning, something changed. I was in the kitchen documenting some expensive cookware when I noticed the watchers had arranged themselves differently in the windows. Instead of just standing there observing, they were positioned to spell out words. In the window over the sink, "Stop." In the dining room window, "Leave." And in the back door glass, "No investigation." That's when one of the invisible voices spoke directly to me for the first time. It was an older woman's voice, and she sounded desperate. "Please," she said, "you have to understand. The children need that money. If you prove there was no fraud, they'll get the insurance payout, but then everyone will know they're alone. They'll be taken away." I stopped what I was doing and listened. The voice continued. "The Hendersons didn't fake their disappearance. Something else took them, something that's been in these mountains longer than any of us. But the children survived. They're in foster care now, and they need that insurance money for their education, for medical care. We're trying to protect them." More voices joined in, all talking at once. They explained that they were watchers, guardians appointed to protect the family's interests after the disappearance. The parents and older relatives were gone, taken by something they wouldn't name, but the 2 youngest children had been found safe and placed with social services. The insurance money was there, her only hope for a decent future. "If you file a report proving no fraud, the children get the money," one voice said. "But if you reveal that their parents really vanished under mysterious circumstances, the authorities will ask too many questions. They'll want to investigate further. The children will lose their anonymity, their protection." I found myself in an impossible position. My job was to investigate potential insurance fraud, and I'd found evidence that there was no fraud. The family really had disappeared, leaving everything behind. But completing my investigation might put these children in danger somehow. The watchers were making it clear that they wouldn't let me compromise the children's safety, even if it meant stopping my investigation permanently. That afternoon, I tried to photograph the Henderson family portrait on the mantel for my report. My camera wouldn't focus on it. Instead, it kept taking pictures of all the watchers gathered in the windows around me. There were more of them than I'd ever seen before, dozens of dark shapes positioned throughout the house, all watching me with an intensity that made my hands shake. The voices were getting more agitated. "She has to choose," they whispered. "The children or the job. Protection or procedure." They started talking about Janet in the third person, like I wasn't there. "If she files the report, everyone will know. If she doesn't file the report, her company will send someone else." I realized they were right. If I didn't complete my investigation, Mountain States would just send another adjuster. But if I did complete it and revealed the truth about the disappearance, it might put the Henderson children in some kind of danger. The watchers seemed genuinely concerned about the kids' welfare, but they were also making it clear that they wouldn't let anyone threaten their protection plan. That night, I made my decision. I was alone in the house, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, trying to write my report. Every time I started typing about the evidence of a genuine disappearance, my computer would freeze up. The watchers filled every window, pressing close to the glass. Some of them looked almost human, but wrong in ways I couldn't pinpoint. Faces too long, limbs that bent in strange directions, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. I started recording a final audio log, explaining what I'd discovered and what I planned to do. "This is Janet Morrison, investigating the Henderson claim in Pine Hollow. I've found no evidence of insurance fraud. The family appears to have genuinely disappeared, leaving behind significant personal property. However, I'm recommending that the company process this claim quietly, without further investigation. The surviving children need this money, and they need their privacy protected." As soon as I said it, the watchers went silent. The pressure in the house changed, like the air itself was listening. I continued recording. "I'm going to destroy my investigation files and recommend immediate payout of the claim. Whatever happened to the Hendersons, their children deserve a chance at a normal life. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the same as following procedure." The last thing I remember clearly is reaching for my camera to delete all the photos. After that, things get fuzzy. I must have finished destroying the evidence and filed a simplified report recommending payout, because that's what my company records show. But I don't remember the drive home, and I don't remember writing that final report. What I do know is that the Henderson children received their insurance money about a month later. The case was closed without any additional investigation, and as far as I know, those kids got the financial support they needed for their future. The watchers got what they wanted. I never went back to Pine Hollow. In fact, I stopped taking remote investigation assignments altogether not long after that case. Now I work from the home office, processing claims that other adjusters investigate in the field. My supervisor thinks I burned out from too much travel, and I let him think that. It's easier than explaining the truth. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice that day. I broke protocol, destroyed evidence, and let my emotions override my professional judgment. But when I think about those Henderson children getting the chance for a better life, I know I'd make the same decision again. I still have that audio recorder, though. Sometimes late at night, I'll play back that final log entry, and I swear I can hear voices in the background, dozens of them, all whispering the same word over and over. Thank you. Looking back now, I think the watchers were exactly what they claimed to be. Guardians protecting those children the only way they knew how. And maybe, for just a few days, they let me be one of them too. I'm 38 years old, and 3 months ago I was facing the worst financial crisis of my life. Used to work the coal mines until they shut down our operation, and by March I was 3 months behind on the mortgage. My wife Sarah had given me an ultimatum: find money fast, or she was taking the kids to her sister's in Virginia and filing for divorce. I'd heard from some guys at the unemployment office about accessible copper deposits up in Devil's Backbone, way back in the mountains where the old mining claims had been abandoned. Copper prices were at a 15-year high, and I figured if I could extract enough over a week, maybe I could pay off what we owed and save my family. I know what you're thinking. That's illegal as hell. Federal land, abandoned claims, the whole thing. But when you're looking at losing your house and your kids, you start weighing different kinds of risk. I'd studied the geological surveys online, knew exactly where the richest veins were supposed to be. The plan was simple: get in, extract what I could carry, get out. 7 days, working solo with basic tools and camping gear. No partners meant no split profits, and I couldn't afford the legal permits even if I'd wanted to go that route. Sarah didn't know the details, but she knew I was going up to the mountains to look into some opportunities. The night before I left, she made it clear this was my last chance. I loaded up my truck with pickaxes, shovels, camping supplies, and a prayer that I could pull this off without getting caught or killed. Devil's Backbone sits about 40 miles northeast of where we lived, deep enough in the mountains that cell service cuts out after the first 20 miles. The old mining town was bigger than I expected, probably housed 300 people back in its heyday, but driving through you could tell something had gone wrong recently. Doors were left hanging, open, belongings scattered in yards like people had left in a hurry. Not the slow death you usually see in these old mining communities, but something that happened fast. I found the main mining area about 2 miles past the town, where the mountainside opened up into terraced levels carved out decades ago. Multiple shaft entrances were still accessible, and I could see the copper veins running through the exposed rock faces just like the surveys had indicated. But what caught my attention first were the tools: pickaxes, shovels, even some mining carts, just abandoned around the work sites. Good condition equipment that somebody had left behind. That should have been my first warning. The second warning was the bones. Human bones, scattered around the mining sites like someone had tossed them after a picnic. But these weren't old remains. The bones were picked completely clean, but still had that fresh, almost white color that meant they hadn't been weathering for years. And they were cracked open. Every single long bone split right down the middle, like something had been getting at the marrow inside. I told myself it was probably animals, bears, maybe coyotes, mountain lions. But the teeth marks on those bones were too big, and they were arranged in patterns that didn't look random. They looked deliberate. Still, I needed that copper. I set up camp near one of the smaller shaft entrances and started working. The veins were even richer than the surveys had suggested. I was pulling out chunks of almost pure copper ore within the first few hours. By the end of day 1, I had enough material to cover at least a month's mortgage payment. That night I heard movement coming from inside the mine shafts. Deep underground, something was walking around down there. Multiple somethings based on the echoing footsteps, and they were communicating. These weird hollow calls that bounced off the tunnel walls and carried up to the surface. At first I thought it might be miners who were working the claims legally, maybe living rough in the tunnels. But the sounds weren't quite right. Too coordinated, like they were patrolling territory. Day 2, I found personal items scattered around the mining sites. A hard hat with Tommy written in marker, an ID badge for someone named Martinez, a thermos that still smelled like coffee. Fresh items, not weathered by seasons of mountain weather. These belonged to the people who'd been mining here recently, the ones who'd left behind all that equipment. I started working faster. By day 3, I was seeing them, tall, impossibly thin figures moving between the mine entrances, always in my peripheral vision, never there when I turned to look directly. But I could tell they were watching me work, studying my movements. And they were getting bolder. I'd catch glimpses of pale, stretched skin and limbs that were too long for any normal human proportions. The thing that really got to me was how they moved. They remembered being human, you could tell. They'd pause at the mining equipment like they recognized it, pick up tools, and hold them correctly. But their movements were all wrong, jerky, unnatural, like they were puppets being operated by someone who'd never actually seen a person work before. On day 4, I realized what had happened to the missing miners, and I realized I was in serious trouble. I was working a particularly rich vein when I heard footsteps coming up from the main shaft behind me. Multiple sets of feet, moving together, coordinated. I turned around and saw them clearly for the first time. 6 figures emerged from the mine entrance. They'd been human once. You could tell by the basic body structure and the remnants of mining clothes they still wore. The one in front still had a hard hat, though it sat crooked on a skull that had stretched and elongated beyond normal human proportions. Their skin was pale and tight, stretched over bones that had grown too long and thin. The their hands had become clawed, and their mouths were full of teeth that were designed for tearing meat, not chewing vegetables. But the worst part was their eyes. They still had human intelligence in there. They recognized me as prey, but they also recognized me as one of them. Another miner, another desperate person who'd come to Devil's Backbone looking for something valuable. The leader, the one with the hard hat, spoke to me in a voice that was mostly human but stretched thin, like his vocal cords had been pulled too tight. "Please," he said, and the word came out with a wet, hungry sound. "Please understand. The hunger. It never stops." He told me they'd been miners, working the claims legally until the company went bankrupt and stopped paying wages. They'd stayed in the tunnels because they had nowhere else to go, nothing else to eat. Started with small animals, then bigger ones, then each other. "Once you cross that line," he explained, "once you taste human meat, your body changes. You become something else, something that can only be satisfied by human flesh." "We've been so hungry," he said, and the others nodded, making those hollow calling sounds I'd been hearing. "Months since anyone came here. Months since we've eaten properly." They formed a circle around me, cutting off my escape routes. But they weren't attacking yet. They were explaining, trying to make me understand that they hadn't chosen this, that the hunger was a pain beyond anything I could imagine, that it drove them to do things they never would have done when they were human. "Join us," the leader said. "Share the meat. Become what we are. It's better than dying." I was trapped 40 miles from civilization with 6 cannibalistic creatures who used to be human beings. No cell service, no way to call for help, and they knew every inch of these tunnels while I barely knew where I'd parked my car. But the thing that scared me most was that I understood them. I'd been driven to illegal mining by the same desperation that had driven them to cannibalism. I was hungry too. Not for flesh, but for security, for a way to save my family. I was starving for a solution to problems that seemed impossible to solve through normal, legal means, and I hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. When they killed the next person who wandered into their territory, some hiker who'd gotten lost and stumbled into the mining area, they offered me a share of the meat, said it was the only way I'd survive long enough to leave Devil's Backbone. I should have refused. I should have fought them or run or found another way, but I was so hungry. And they explained that if I just had a taste, if I crossed that line with them, they'd let me go. They'd consider me pack, and pack takes care of pack. I ate the meat. The moment I swallowed that first bite, I felt my body begin to change. Not all at once. It was gradual, like a fever that slowly consumes you from the inside out. My bones began to stretch and lengthen. My skin pulled tight across my frame, my teeth sharpened and multiplied. But the hunger hit me immediately. A gnawing, constant pain that made every other concern in my life seem trivial. My mortgage problems, my wife's threats, my children's needs, all of it faded behind the overwhelming need for human flesh. The pack welcomed me. They taught me how to hunt, how to set traps using the mining equipment, how to lure people into the tunnels where we could kill them without witnesses. My mining experience made me valuable. I knew how to create cave-ins to block escape routes, how to use the tunnel systems to our advantage, how to make the underground maze even more confusing for our prey. I stopped thinking about Sarah and the kids. The hunger erased those memories slowly, replacing them with endless fantasies about fresh meat and the next kill. Within a week, I couldn't even remember their faces clearly. The pack made me their leader eventually. I was the newest, which meant I had the most recent human knowledge, the best understanding of how to attract victims to our territory. Under my guidance, we started leaving signs of copper deposits near hiking trails, spreading rumors in town about easy money to be made in the abandoned mines. It worked. Desperate people came to Devil's Backbone regularly, drawn by the same financial pressures that had brought me there originally. We fed well. I've been hunting in these tunnels for months now. The hunger never stops. It's a constant burning pain that only gets worse between kills. But I don't remember why I originally came here anymore. I don't remember having a family or a house or problems that seemed important at the time. All I remember is the hunger and the satisfaction of fresh meat and the endless search for the next victim who'll wander into our territory looking for something valuable. The copper's still here, rich veins running through every tunnel. But nobody who finds it ever lives to spend the money. We make sure of that. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a social worker for the state. Most people don't realize how much driving comes with this job. I spend half my time on back roads checking on families, following up on reports, making sure kids are safe. It's not glamorous work, but somebody's got to do it. I'd been doing it for about 6 years when I got the Henderson case, and honestly, I probably should have known better than to go out to Rattlesnake Hollow alone. But when you get 3 separate calls about kids not showing up to school for months, you don't really have a choice. The Henderson family lived way back in the mountains, maybe 2 hours from my office if you took all the right turns. 3 kids, Sarah, 6, Michael, 8, and Rebecca, 11. According to the school district, none of them had been to class since early October. The report said the family was isolated and uncooperative with outside contact, which in my line of work usually means either serious neglect or parents who just don't trust the system. Either way, I had to check it out. I loaded up my state-issued Honda with all the usual stuff: case files, camera, recording equipment, those clipboards with the official forms that make people think you're more important than you actually are. The GPS worked fine until I got about 10 miles out from the hollow, then just quit. No signal, no directions, nothing. But I'd printed out directions from Google Maps before I left, so I wasn't too worried. Just another day dealing with mountain families who lived where technology goes to die. Rattlesnake Hollow spread out along this narrow creek bed, maybe 25 houses total. Most of them looked like they'd been there since the 50s or 60s. Small frame houses with metal roofs, some trailers mixed in, the kind of place where everybody's related to everybody else somehow. What struck me right away was how quiet it was. There's no dogs barking, no kids playing in the yards, no adults sitting on porches. Just silence. I parked in front of what I thought was the Henderson place, a white house with green shutters that matched the address I had written down. The yard had toys scattered around, a bicycle lying on its side, like kids had just been playing there and got called inside for dinner. But when I knocked on the front door, nothing. I could see through the screen that there was still food on the kitchen table. Looked like it might still be warm. Plates set for 5 people, but nobody home. That's when I heard Sarah's voice. "Help me," she called from somewhere inside the house. "Please, somebody help me." I'm trained for this kind of situation. When a kid calls for help, you respond. I opened the screen door and called out, "Sarah, this is Carol from Social Services. Are you okay?" "I'm in here," came her voice, sounding scared and small like a 6-year-old should. "They locked me in the bedroom." I followed her voice through the house, checking each room. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, all empty but looking like people had just stepped out. Her voice kept moving, always seemed to be coming from the next room over. "Sarah, keep talking to me, honey. Where are your parents? Where are Michael and Rebecca?" "They're here too," she said. And now I could hear Michael's voice joining in. "We're all trapped. Please get us out." Then Rebecca's voice. "The bad people locked us up. They won't let us go." I was recording everything on my phone. Standard procedure for welfare checks involving children in distress. But every time I thought I'd found the room they were calling from, it would be empty. Their voices would start up again from somewhere else in the house. I checked closets, under beds, even looked in cabinets big enough for a kid to hide in. Nothing. After about 20 minutes of this, as I stepped outside to think, that's when I heard all 3 kids calling from the house next door. Same voices, same scared tone, asking for help. So I went over there, found the front door, unlocked, went inside. Another empty house with signs of recent life. Toys on the floor, dishes in the sink, but no people anywhere. "We're in the basement," Sarah called. But this house didn't have a basement. "Don't leave us," Michael begged. "Please don't leave us here." The voices were so real, so perfectly what you'd expect from scared children. They knew details from my case file somehow, talked about their teachers at school, mentioned their grandmother's farm, used the exact nicknames their parents had given them, according to my paperwork. But I couldn't find them anywhere. By the 3rd house, I was starting to understand that something was very wrong in Rattlesnake Hollow. Not just with the Henderson family, but with everything. I'd been doing this job long enough to know what abandoned places feel like, and this wasn't abandoned. This was evacuated. Recent, sudden, like everyone had just gotten up and left in the middle of their daily routines. That's when I started hearing adult voices too. A woman calling my name. "Carol! Carol, we need help with the children." A man's voice. "Social services? Thank God you're here. We've been trying to call for weeks." They knew my full name, my title, even my supervisor's name back at the office. They used proper social work terminology, referenced specific case numbers from files I'd worked over the past few years, details that only someone from inside the department would know. I tried to respond, tried to have actual conversations with these voices. But every time I spoke, I felt something strange happening to my throat, like the words were being pulled out of me instead of just spoken. By the 5th or 6th house, I realized I couldn't talk in my own voice anymore. When I tried to call out to the Henderson children, what came out was someone else's voice entirely, a woman I didn't recognize, with an accent I'd never had. That's when I saw them. They looked almost human from a distance, but when you got close enough to really see, everything was wrong. Too tall, too thin, skin that was pale in a way that didn't look healthy, and no mouths. Just smooth skin where their mouths should have been. But they were talking. Sarah's voice, Michael's voice, Rebecca's voice, my supervisor's voice, voices of people from cases I'd worked years ago. All coming from these things that couldn't possibly be speaking. I understood then that they'd been collecting voices from everyone who'd lived in Rattlesnake Hollow. Not just the Henderson family, but all the families. Generations of voices stored away somehow, used to communicate and remember and exist. They weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were trying to preserve them. Keep their memories alive, their stories, their way of speaking. In some sick way, it reminded me of my job. Protecting people, keeping families together, making sure vulnerable populations don't just disappear without anyone caring. These things were doing the same work, just differently. They offered me a choice. I could leave, go back to my office, file a report that the Henderson family had moved away without leaving a forwarding address. Or I could stay and help them collect more voices, preserve more communities before they were forgotten entirely. I thought about all the families I'd worked with over the years, all the people who lived in places like this that the rest of the world forgot about. Mountain communities that were dying out as young people moved to cities, taking their stories and their voices with them. What these creatures were doing wasn't evil. It was conservation. I stayed. Now I still do social work, still drive around to check on families in remote locations. But my job has expanded a bit. When I find families that are isolated, struggling, at what? Risk of being forgotten by the world, I guide them toward places where their voices can be preserved forever. Places like Rattlesnake Hollow. I can speak in hundreds of different voices now. It's useful for the work. When I need to call in reports to my supervisor, I can use his voice to approve cases. When I need families to trust me, I can use the voice of their grandmother or their pastor or someone else they'll listen to. The system is much more efficient this way. The Henderson children are safe now. Their voices are part of something bigger, something that will remember them long after everyone else forgets. And there are always more families who need that kind of protection, that kind of permanence. I'm good at finding them.